And it's kind of gotten to the point too, where in US specifically, the people behind these very big tech, the biggest of the big tech companies, are also the main donors to the two US political parties. You have like Peter Thiel on the Republican side, you have Reid Hoffman on the Democrat side, and Eric Schmidt on the Democrat side. I mean, they fund our politicians and they dominate our private sector infrastructure, especially as we've been forced to be more online, specifically since the COVID era. And the goal is to have things digitalize even further and have it all be on these people's systems and have us become completely dependent on their infrastructure.
Late last year, investigative journalist Whitney Webb published an eye-opening article titled "Bitcoin and the Plot to Destroy Financial Privacy." Webb exposed a grand plan by global elites to control financial and economic policies affecting the world's 8 billion people through a public-private partnership based at the World Economic Forum. This partnership, known as the World Economic Forum's Partnership Against Cybercrime, WEF-PAC, includes members such as the FBI, the US Department of Justice, intelligence agencies from Israel and Britain, major banks like Bank of America, tech giants like Amazon and Microsoft, and the SWIFT payment system. In their mission to combat cybercrime and prevent global cyber attacks, WEF-PAC proposes merging commercial banks and financial authorities with national security and law enforcement agencies. However, this partnership goes far beyond preventing cyber attacks. In her article, Whitney warned that it's a dystopian policy designed to create a legal revolving door between government agencies, regulators, and WEF members, who are the same executives of the large banks and tech firms being integrated with public agencies. This revolving door grants government agencies unrestricted access to individuals' private data through these private organizations, while the organizations leverage government authority to create policies that benefit them and expand their control. One can only imagine the far-reaching implications of such mergers. In this scenario, everyone wins except the general public. We have all become unwitting pawns in a disturbing game of power, control, and the complete subjugation of humanity. Moreover, WEF-PAC is just one example of the growing trend of public-private partnerships. Another example is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which aim to end poverty, hunger, gender, and other inequalities and preserve our planet through a gradual transition to affordable and clean energy. The problem is that the same entities that contributed to these issues are now tasked with creating the solutions. The proponents of these policies are often former executives of giant financial institutions, working closely with governments and public agencies to save the planet. Their plan involves a system of debt imperialism, allowing countries to borrow indefinitely as long as they achieve the SDGs. In a recent discussion with Peter McCormack on the What Bitcoin Did channel, Whitney delves into the incredibly dystopian nature of this public-private partnership. She reveals plans to usher us into a new era where these schemes are openly displayed, with the global elite ruling the world without any pretense of being in the background. This is the alarming future that awaits humanity, and Whitney believes we are already in the early stages. As we share clips from the discussion, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more content like this. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
Okay, so in the case of like US intelligence, if you go back to the very beginning, and there's even CIA like deputy directors that have said that, it was all Wall Street people at the beginning. It was Wall Street lawyers, it was Wall Street bankers. And since that point, from the genesis of the CIA, there's been revolving doors between CIA and Wall Street that have continued up until today. And really, you could look at the CIA as a public-private enterprise in some sense. It's a public security agency, but it's more or less functioned throughout its history as Wall Street's secret police. That's why its earliest coups, for example, like its first coup in Guatemala, was done on behalf of United Fruit, a major multinational corporation headquartered in the United States, which interestingly enough was later acquired by Leon Black's father, and then Leslie Wexner's business mentor.
I know that name.
Yeah. And then you also have, like the coup in Iran, over like Anglo-American oil, like them losing their holdings there. The coup in 1973 in Chile, you can argue it was because of efforts to nationalize copper and all these largely Western mining companies losing out, and then they come in and do a coup and what have you. It's really been symbiotic for some time. And I think, as we moved into the information age, the CIA saw an opportunity. Well, let me back up a little bit. The internet from the very beginning was, it originally started as ARPANET, a project of the Pentagon. And for anyone that really wants to know about that history, I would highly recommend the book Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine. There were efforts early on to kingmake the companies who would come to dominate the internet. And that has happened. It's just a matter of public record. If you look at the biggest companies in big tech, I've done work about how Facebook was essentially launched as a resurrection of a failed DARPA program called LifeLog by the same person that resurrected the failed DARPA program, Total Information Awareness, one of the most insane surveillance proposals ever in US history, resurrected as Palantir. You can thank Peter Thiel for that, co-founder of PayPal. And a lot of these other companies that have become huge, Google, for example, there's a good article by Nafez Ahmed written on by Insert when he published at Insurge Intelligence called "How the CIA Made Google." If you look at a lot of these companies, you will find intelligence agencies at the beginning. Palantir, I mentioned earlier, took In-Q-Tel money, developed very closely with the CIA. It began at PayPal. It's a PayPal spinoff, Palantir is. Oracle, another huge company in Silicon Valley. Larry Ellison, before he started Oracle, was working on Project Oracle at the CIA on databases and was the infrastructure for Oracle as we know it now. A lot of these, there's been a lot of symbiosis between intelligence agencies and these big companies for a long time, and they couldn't have done it without venture capital. And that's arguably why the CIA launched In-Q-Tel in the late 90s, because they wanted to become big players in Silicon Valley.
There's no doubt that a symbiotic relationship exists between Silicon Valley and intelligence groups, not just in the United States, but also in foreign countries like Israel, as the Jeffrey Epstein trials have proved. Last year, J.P. Morgan Chase reached a $75 million settlement with the U.S. Virgin Islands over a lawsuit accusing the financial behemoth of facilitating Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking enterprise for 15 years. Though the bank said the settlement doesn't involve admissions of liability, it added that it regrets any association with Epstein and would never have continued doing business with him if it believed he was using the bank in any way to commit heinous crimes. We all know what to make of that explanation. This same bank and others are being fully merged with regulators and intelligence agencies in a nightmare scenario that is as dystopian as it gets. In her article, Whitney wrote, "A merging of commercial banks, their regulators, and the intelligence agencies is a complete nightmare scenario. But this is exactly what the World Economic Forum has come to promote as a model for public-private partnership. But perhaps more critically for American citizens, this is a policy developed with the direct participation of the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the U.S. Secret Service, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the country's most systemically important commercial banks. The establishment in this country supports these policies, and from what I can see, they have every intention of trying to make them a reality." Let's get back to the interview.
So what I mentioned earlier about like total information awareness, this is a program that was just deemed so insane in the early 2000s that essentially every mainstream media publication railed against it and rights group railed against it. But then when they relaunched the same program essentially as a private entity, as a private sector entity, no one complained. And so the CIA for a long time and other intelligence agencies have followed this exact playbook, specifically Israeli intelligence. When you move into the private sector, you can get away with a lot more than you can in the public sector sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do. And so there have been efforts to do that, I would argue, for a very long time. And if you look at how these big tech companies have developed, and, for example, revelations from the Snowden leaks, just like how the extent to which these private companies, how much of your data that they're selling or passing to U.S. intelligence for warrantless surveillance. I mean, they've been collaborators of this for a very, very long time. And I think there really hasn't been enough scrutiny of that. And I would really argue that a lot of these companies operate more often than not as intelligence fronts. And it's kind of gotten to the point, too, where in US specifically, the people behind these very big tech, the biggest of the big tech companies, are also the main donors to the two US political parties. You have like Peter Thiel on the Republican side, you have Reid Hoffman on the Democrat side, and Eric Schmidt on the Democrat side. I mean, they fund our politicians and they dominate our private sector infrastructure, especially as we've been forced to be more online, specifically since the COVID era. And the goal is to have things digitalize even further and have it all be on these people's systems and have us become completely dependent on their infrastructure. And these people are in bed with intelligence. And even aside from the intelligence connections, they have a lot of dirty laundry. Why did Jeffrey Epstein have connections with almost every big tech oligarch in the United States? I mean, not enough people have bothered to ask that question. Why were so many of them subpoenaed during the JP Morgan Epstein case in the US Virgin Islands that ended up being settled? I forget how much JP Morgan paid to make it all go away, but a lot of money.
And I think this idea of the intelligence, sort of going into the private sector in order to sort of like, whitewash away, public, disgust at these services, you could also sort of look at, well, hey, is that exact same thing playing out in the digital dollar sphere? Everyone is all hoorah, no, down, CBDs suck, and this is so bad, but no one gives a shit that these intelligence linked companies are building digital dollars that have $120 billion worth of liquidity. No one cares. And so is this idea of the CBDC as a digital dollar sort of a red herring? Why are they moving into the private sphere? Oh, is it because they actually retain more rights to restrict user access and the right to transact and blacklisting?
Yeah.
You can do more of that as a private sector entity than you can as the public sector.
And it's already happened. I mean, Bank of America illegally gave a ton of user data and financial transaction data to people, to the federal government on January 6th. And you have JP Morgan debanking people. One of the most notable, I guess it was last year, was Dr. Mercola, who was just taken off, and his whole team really was debanked by JP Morgan. No explanation. I mean, they can do that, and people be like, "Oh, it's a private company; it's their choice." And when the government does it, it's a little bit different, right? So basically, what we have here is a global public-private partnership, and when it's convenient for this particular group, they move into the public sphere, and when it's convenient, they move into the private sphere. That's why you have the revolving door. It's all been intertwined and tied together for a very long time. And now that's why we're being pushed into this new era where it's overt, the stakeholder capitalism era, the era of the public-private partnership, which is, the whole thing of the World Economic Forum and all of that, what they've been promoting since they came into existence in the 70s.
Currently, the WEF PAC is charged with stomping out cybercrime. But Whitney believes the real reason behind the initiative is to introduce more instruments of control until the entire system is completely under their control. This global cult has been known to create the problem and then prefer a solution that's supposed to help everyone. For example, in recent years, there has been much talk about a big doomsday cyber attack, and in comes the WEF PAC to rescue us all. The WEF and its allies, including several US government agencies, need a couple of things to come to the forefront of the public mind before they can offer the dystopian solutions that they have already on the books, Whitney warned in her article. In order to fuse banks, regulators, and the national security state to end fragmentation in the global financial system, global financial instability must first become a major global concern. With everything that has been taking place since the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, it seems we are not that far away from global financial instability becoming a top concern for the average person. Whitney asks some important questions at the end of the article. Will we sleepwalk into a world of CBDCs where intelligence agencies, central banks, and commercial banks have fused into the same Orwellian entity? Or will we fight the groups and institutions that have looted American wealth for well over a century and demand a return to the Constitution and the right to privacy, not just financially but in all senses? What are your thoughts on the giant public-private partnership threatening to swallow us all up? Please share your thoughts on Whitney's interview and article in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications bell for more videos like this. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks for watching.